Good afternoon. My name's Colin Shaw. I'm the founder and CEO of Beyond Philosophy. This afternoon we have with us Steven Walden, who's the head of research and consultancy at Beyond Philosophy, and really eager to share with you some results that we've got of the Global Customer Experience Management Survey that we've been conducting over the last few months. So before we get on to that, I just want to make sure everybody knows how to use the system. We will be running this until about, for the next 45 minutes, we're going to allow about 15 minutes for questions. When you get a question, you should hopefully be able to see from my screen now that you just simply ask the question by putting in the, asking the question in the boxes that you can see there. For those of you that don't know Beyond Philosophy, and I'm aware that we have a number of clients that are on the call, so welcome to them. Beyond Philosophy, all we do is customer experience. We do nothing else. We focus very much on thought leadership, as we've written 4 books on the subject of customer experience. We do research like this on a regular basis. We have offices in Atlanta, in Georgia, and in London, as you can probably tell from my accent. And we've got links with academia, and we particularly not just look at customer experience, but we look at the whole gamut of customer experience by looking at the emotional side of the experience as well. We have had the pleasure of working with many different organizations over the period of time. And I guess this is an important aspect of what we're going to be talking about today, because we started Beyond Philosophy back in 2002, so we've nearly been going for 10 years. And back then, customer experience was a fairly new, was a new topic. I think my first book, Building Great Customer Experiences, was literally one of the first on the marketplace. And the really interesting thing is that we are seeing the industry change. We're seeing an industry being created around customer experience, and we're now seeing an industry going global. And I think that's what we're going to be talking a bit about this afternoon, about what's actually happening with customer experience. What does that mean for the organizations and for customer experience professionals, which I guess a number of the people that are on the call on the webinar this afternoon are. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Steven. Steven's going to run the bulk of the presentation this afternoon. I'm going to drop in at various different occasions just to sort of reinforce some points and I guess make some points around what this means for some CE professionals. So over to you, Steven.
Thank you, Colin, and welcome everyone. So we're going to look at 5 themes in this presentation. We'll first look at just a little bit about the methodology, so you understand where we get the data from. We're going to answer your questions, as stated, questions in the invite across 4 areas, looking at a model of the state of the market in customer experience globally, how resources are being allocated globally in customer experience, so for instance, which industries are strong, which companies are strong in customer experience by allocation of resources, and also looking at the so what are the risks, what are the challenges, what drives customer experience today, what is the best practice, what do I need to do to be doing effective customer experience management. This slide just shows we sent out 10 questions in our invite, and we'll be answering those through the themes. For instance, we spoke about the 7-stage customer experience maturity model. That will be answered in the first section. Also, we spoke about the industries, regions, companies that are strong in spend. We'll be looking at that, how resources are allocated in the second section. The what industries will see the greatest growth, the drivers, challenges, risks. That'll be answered in the third section, and we're looking at best practices and innovations in the last section. And throughout, as Colin was saying, he'll be asking questions, what innovations are around that is driving the market today. First of all, let's do a little dive into the methodology, and this is important because we want you to understand that what we say is empirically grounded. First of all, there was the quantitative side. what we did was we sourced 8,000 customer experience executives in over 2,106 companies covering the world, 239 countries and regions. This is a truly global study. We sourced those executives from social media, Google, our own database of 20,000 contacts, things like LinkedIn. We wanted to get a comprehensive database of customer experience executives to understand where they're coming from and what is happening in the market today. We also set a high bar for what we would include as a relevant company doing customer experience. We don't want just any company. We don't want to include companies that have been active in customer experience, say, 3 years ago and are currently doing very little. We don't want to include weakly active companies, those companies that just basically state we're doing customer experience, but it's not, for instance, a fundamental part or seems like a fundamental part of their strategy or what they're implementing. So we set this high bar. We only included companies that have been active, for instance, on Google in the last year using that source, or have an active presence by having in LinkedIn, for instance, as one tool we used, customer experience in employees' titles today. On the qualitative side, we identified 53 expert professionals in customer experience. As you can see from this world map, we interviewed people from Russia to South Africa, from Peru to New Zealand. Again, it's a global study across all continents, except Antarctica, of course, and the base of people included just under half, as you can see there, CxO level. These are people who are called directors of customer experience or vice presidents of customer experience. We also had 30% of our experts who really came from 10 to 15 years of looking at customer experience in their region or globally, who regularly wrote and report about customer experience, as well as we included people on the ground heading up implementations of customer experience, giving that ground level view as well. Our experts are also not just in the heavy C sectors, the traditional sectors like banking, insurance, and telecommunications. We have 13 key verticals, some B2B, like logistics, and some in new growing sectors like healthcare, looking at the patient experience, as well as utilities and retail and so forth. A true spread of industries was included. So, that was an important part. We want you to understand that this is empirically grounded. 53 key people, 8,000 customer experience executives over 2,106 companies globally. First then, we're going to look at how we can model the state of the market in customer experience today. To do this, we developed a maturity index. What does this mean? We looked at 7 quantitative criteria. What does that mean? We looked at where people came from, which types of companies they were in, whether they're big multinational companies, which sectors those companies were in, how many companies there were in customer experience per country. And we also looked at some qualitative criteria through talking in-depth interviews with our 53 professionals, answering questions like, where is the focus? Is it on customer satisfaction as an outcome people are on, or loyalty? Those kind of questions. An index of customer experience maturity. And what we found was this picture. We've color-coded those countries, and you can see the color coding by the left-hand side, their state of maturity. And there are 7 stages of maturity. Those countries, for instance, like the UK, USA, Netherlands, and Singapore at the highest levels of maturity. We also see an interesting sector in countries like India, China, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, that are increasingly interested, what we call the mid to low mature segment of the market. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a second.
So this is my first part of this, where I guess I just wanted to sort of reinforce, when we're talking about maturity here, we're talking about, if we go back one slide, looking at these areas. And I guess the sort of the so what for me is, if you're in a global organization and you are, if I go back in the day of, when we first started around customer experience, customer experience was a new differentiator. I guess the challenge here is that in some of these markets, as we're seeing, as Stephen's saying, within the UK, US, that there is a high degree of maturity, and therefore the competition around customer experience is starting to grow. And therefore, you're either going to be one of the first movers and probably have moved up that maturity scale, or you're now going to be one of the laggards who haven't even started thinking about customer experience. But the competition for getting customer experience right is absolutely increasing in those areas. And one of the other things, I guess I would say, another so what for me is that if you're a global organization and you're now starting to think about improving your customer experience across the globe, you need to realize that, again, competition is starting to increase. And therefore, you need to sort of factor that in. And other key thing, going back to, again, the beginning of Beyond Philosophy, is that customer experience is global. Okay, I think one of the key findings of this is customer experience as a concept is global, and that we are seeing a definite level of maturity and understanding as time goes on.
Thank you, Colin. What are the drivers to growth in customer experience? Well, countries typically start off in what we would call acquisition mode. They're selling products or selling services, and people are ready and willing and there to buy. Brands fly off the shelf is one comment that was stated by one of our interviewees. It's a sales-driven economy. Why would a company execute customer experience in this? Well, some of the drivers you can see there, they just want to be different, what we call a blue ocean strategy. There's starting to be things like deregulation, for instance, in telecommunications. They want to differentiate themselves from the current market. Other things that, quite frankly, it comes from headquarters from another part of the world, say, for instance, the USA. The mission is do customer experience. That's internationalized across nations, wherever you are. Type of countries we're seeing in this area are countries like Peru, Nigeria, China, India, and Brazil. Not all are moving to the next stage, but some certainly are, and will indicate that.
And I think I would just add here, what you need to think about, again, going back to the so what, is where are you? So as Stephen runs through these, think about where you are and the reasons why you are doing this in your organization, because as we've talked about here is what we're starting to see is best practice and innovation. And this is the first stage, if you like, this acquisition stage. But as Stephen runs through these, just think about where are you.
The next stage is relationship building, where you're starting to think about the customer or your client, where you're starting to run, for instance, satisfaction surveys. You're starting to see in the key drivers there some degree of segmentation. Maybe a luxury segment is developing, changing expectations in your customer base. Still see the normal drivers in terms of potentially HQ saying you should do it, but also some technology there as well. And likes of Turkey, United Arab Emirates, South Africa, and Russia are the sort of countries we're seeing there. At the third level is the retention stage. This is what we see in the high maturity countries like the USA and UK, Singapore, Canada, and Netherlands as well. What the attention here is to preventing churn, retaining your customers, and there are some more complicated drivers coming to play. Certainly about managing retention programs, loyalty programs, and driving that through the organization. Certainly about still regulation coming to play, but also about some degree of many channels starting to develop that customers can communicate with you. How do you manage that complexity in a big multinational corporation with things starting to go complex?
And therefore, again, just building on that, if you look at the key drivers, where are you? Is the reason why that you are undertaking this work to optimize the channels, which is under retention? Are you launching branded programs? Or are you still thinking about customer acquisition? Because what we have seen is the more mature the organization gets, the more they understand what customer experience is about, the more that they shift from acquisition into relationship and into retention. And I think another important aspect of this is, you know, when we talk about acquisition, it's the classic stuff of, you know, let's just acquire as many customers as we can. Then there's a level of this maturity where people have started to realize that there is a more emotional aspect to the customer experience, and hence our word here, relationship. And what we then know, even just from a cost perspective, is that acquisition is fine, but if you've got a blooming great hole in your bucket and you're allowing loads of customers to leave, then that's A, inefficient, costing a load of money, and therefore, you know, you need to look at retention. So again, you know, from a best practice, from innovation, these are some of the areas that we believe you should be looking at.
One interesting area on acquisition is number 3 there, leapfrogger technology. We have found, for instance, from some of our interviewees in Brazil and Peru, that actually that web-based approach to customer experience, how can we make our web front end an experience, is leading to people thinking about customer experience more and more, even in those markets. But in terms of movements, what we're seeing then is essentially push in certain areas, such as the classic BRICS and Nigeria type environment, Brazil, Russia, India, those sort of places. And what we're seeing is that moving increasingly to a relationship base, and likewise from relationship to retention, the Turkey, UAE, South Africa, Russia, those types of countries increasingly looking at loyalty as a key focus. I'll give an example at the bottom there, because even in the high mature markets of the UK, USA, those type of environments, we see a similar movement across verticals, but across industry sectors not normally associated with customer experience. Increasing interest in B2B, for instance, going from their current mode of acquisition to thinking about relationship. And likewise in motor, aviation and utilities. It's not just about the big 4, banking, telco, retail and IT and services. Just a quick point in terms of do we see an increase in investment in customer experience programs being undertaken by companies to date? The answer to that, from based on our 53 professionals, is yes, but slight. On average, about 15% in terms of investment. All are seeing an increase, or most are seeing an increase, 73.5%, but it is at that slight level. But I would bear this in mind. That is about company programs doing CE. There are some key niches, such as motor, aviation, key interest in developing and experiencing Western brands in those countries like the UAE, India, and China, that will push customer experience in segments. The next theme we have is about how resources are allocated. So where is the most sort of levels of interest and investment occurring in customer experience? And our first picture is to look, let's look at regionally. And what we've done here is we basically, again, using those 8,000 customer experience executives over 2,106 companies, looked, simple question, where are the greatest concentrations of active customer experience companies? These are highlighted on the colors here. So again, the greatest concentration is, in some ways, the usual suspects, the countries you'd expect to be heavy in customer experience, the likes of North America, USA and Canada, and the likes of UK, and maybe a little bit of the Netherlands there as well. Seeing growing interest in Brazil, China, South Africa, Singapore, and interestingly in New Zealand. We do find, for those who on the call today from those parts of the world, Australasia, Australia, New Zealand, a strong CE executive base, a large number of people with the title customer experience. Also from India as well, a strong interest based probably culturally in terms of the cultural service, customer service, backing and industries in that country. These are highlighted key countries where there has been investment.
And again, just building on that, if you're a multinational company, as I know many of you are that are on the line today, you need to consider this in terms of the competition in the marketplace on customer experience. But you also need to consider that from then that maturity angle, which is to go, Okay, so these organizations may have a number of people whose job title is customer experience, but you know, what's the work they're actually doing?
And we'll come to that point because that is a very important point. Just this slide, just again, the point, even in low active countries, there is still a push through corporate mission, the language of software vendors pushing customer experience. Even in countries like Sudan, Afghanistan, you find, for instance, telecommunications companies pushing the term customer experience, which is why it is one of the key things, a global phenomenon. Here we've just starred those countries and areas that we see as growing and key to customer experience. And we've seen already Australasia, that awareness factor. From the regional and global view to the industry view now, and basically 63% of those companies now, those CE active companies, come from the 4 big verticals: telecommunications, banking, retail, we call IT, and services. So if you're in these industries, there is a big focus in customer experience. But even outside those industries, we're seeing a growing presence from, for instance, insurance and airlines and motor down the list there. And also large-scale investments, particularly Boeing and Delta, in customer experience. Innovation here is a key driver, driving forth software implementations and interest, particularly in how we can innovate around customer experience for potentially products as well as services.
And this is where the I may be starting to get a little bit more provocative than Steven does, because when you look at these industries, I guess the important part is that you start to think about what we're actually saying here, the definition of what we're saying. So to be clear about what we're saying and taking a step back, what we're saying is these industries have allocated more resources than other organizations. Okay, these industries have allocated people into customer experience. The key issue for me is, and the key issue for all of us, is, you know, are these people actually doing proper, what we would call proper, customer experience work? So let's be absolutely clear. This is not saying that telecoms and banking are providing a great customer experience. In my view, they don't. What this is saying is that they have allocated resources to doing this. Whether that resource is doing the right thing, if I was being optimistic, I would say that they've recognized that they're not providing a great customer experience, and they are now trying to improve it. If I was pessimistic, I would be saying that all they've done is jumped on a fad, and they have allocated people's jobs to this, but actually they're not doing very much. But that's the cynic in me, and maybe the 30 years worth of being in business. But you know, I just want to make sure everyone understands the difference between the two, because that's an important difference. Resource job titles does not mean actual focus by those organizations.
Looking at the numbers again, we do see that little bit of diversification. Again, to the point, are they doing customer experience, is where we'll be coming to in some of the risks and challenges in the next, as we get along this presentation, the next theme. But we do see the more mature you are, the more it goes outside telcos, banking. The more you look, for instance, in this chart, the big 4 verticals, only 43% of UK 276 active customer experience companies came from those big 4. They are coming from somewhere else: insurance, utilities, motor, those kind of industries. The more mature, the more other industry sectors express interest in customer experience. So if you're from one of those other industries, there is that focus there as well. Now we get down to the company level, and what we see here is applying the same criteria, looking for, in this case, where those companies are active in customer experience, spread of number of countries and the number of customer experience executives they have in place. We find this list of the top 20 companies. Now, it does not mean to say they're the best companies in CE, and that's very important. This is where most resources allocated to customer experience. This comes from just the top 5 I'll mention: HP, HSBC, Vodafone, Gap, and Amex. Again, from the big 4, IT, bank, telecom, and retail sectors.
And again, just to reiterate Stephen's point, what this does not mean for me is that this is an interesting list, because, again, this is a personal view. I'm not out of the research, but I know that American Express do a good job on customer experience. I think that Gap do. I think that a number of organisations here do. I also think a number of organisations here don't. People like HSBC, Wells Fargo, of which I am customers, so I know, that do not. The good news is that they could be allocating more resources because they've recognised it. The bad news could be that what they are just doing is relabeling people's job titles and carry on doing the same old things.
Just by way of example, if we look at what HP and HSBC are doing, those top 2, HP have a total customer experience program. They use words like simplifying ownership, making products work to get better together, looking for competitive pricing. There's some of the transactional language they use. So there's an issue there. They co-create solutions. Do they provide that great wow experience is one point. HSBC, in terms of a lot of focus here on the global intelligence, the measurement of customer experience and what they've expressed. So again, it's got an angle towards customer experience about transactional usability, how can we make things better together, how can we simplify things. Another angle that's expressed around how can we measure things. Part of customer experience, but the question is that wholeheartedly customer experience? The next one we look at is turn to our CE professional group now to say, what is the most admired company in customer experience? And what we see there is, to a certain extent, the usual suspects, in terms of Apple, Amazon.com, Zappos. But why is an important theme there? It's about, in many cases, their degree and ability to personalize what they do. In many cases, their focus and the language used about why is around their web-based service, their web-based experience. Essentially, they're e-retailers and going in that direction very strongly and providing a more personal touch to what could be an impersonal channel. Again, emphasize the point, these are the most admired. They're not necessarily those that throw the most resources at customer experience.
And again, when you start to use the word maturity as we did before, then what we know is that there is a rational part of an experience and there is an emotional part of an experience. What the majority of organizations look at is they only look at the rational part of the experience. And particularly if you look back on the previous slides around the telcos, around the banks, they certainly only look at the rational parts of the experience. The interesting thing for me here is when you look down this list, the majority of these customers would talk about having an emotional attachment to. Customers talk in glowing terms about Apple and Disney and Starbucks and Zappos. And there is that level and degree of emotional attachment that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is therefore into that whole retention field. And I think that that's something that should not be lost in all of this. That the maturity of understanding of what customer experience is, that it's not just a rational thing, but it's an emotional thing as well as that maturity level increases.
Next section is about, okay, so what are the risks, challenges, and drivers to doing effective customer experience? We've alluded to these, some Colin's mentioned about the misdefinition, and we'll be going through some of these now. For instance, we have heard from our professionals that in actual fact in certain industries it is relatively strong, but there's still limitations in how it's adopted. And even in those certain industries, there is a degree of a third doing something, two-thirds not really doing something at all, or just dabbling in it. We've noticed this in the banking industry, for instance, in the USA, where CE is a core strategy for TD Bank, Umpqua and Huntingdon, 1/3 dabbling in it. So there's still an opportunity there, but it also a risk because it tends to be limited but strong in niches. The second one is about this concept of it essentially being lipstick on a pig. The use of the term to rebadge what you're currently doing just as experience. I'm doing marketing, now I'm doing customer experience, but I'm doing the same thing. It was essentially one of the comments picked up in the market in Australia, confusion between customer experience and customer service. And when you buy things from vendors, when you buy technical tools in contact centers, that suddenly becomes customer experience.
And to give you some practical examples of this, because I think this is probably one of the most important things for us, certainly coming out of this survey, and one of the big dangers. Because again, to be provocative, I would say this is a danger to customer experience as a concept. If you take a couple of steps back, certainly back in the day when CRM was all the rage, you know, one of the issues became, you know, what do you actually mean by CRM? I could never have a conversation with anybody without having that you know, the question of, well, what do you mean by CRM? And the same applies with customer experience now. And we see daily in the organizations that we deal with that functions, projects are getting rebadged customer experience when actually they're really not doing what we would define as customer experience work. They're more customer service, certainly a little bit of customer improvement, but not customer experience. And I guess the key point there for me is this. The danger is if everyone carries on doing what they've always done, they're going to carry on getting the same results. And if all we are seeing is a rebadging of projects, and if all you are seeing is a rebadging of projects within your organization, you're going to carry on getting the same results. Just calling it customer experience doesn't actually change anything. And therein lies the danger and the risk.
Our next problem, risk, is just vendors misappropriating the term. They talk about CRM, but actually they mean customer experience management. Just a few examples from various parts of the world. Bhutan Telecom say and make the claim we enable Bhutan to have an end-to-end customer experience management approach. In actual fact, what they're doing is just being sold customer contact center solutions, help desk support and management. And likewise with Saudi Telecom, going to a vendor, getting management of their contact center, but actually calling it managing customer experience across multiple geographies. The next risk is the risk that you don't truly take in the emotional viewpoint. Key difference between doing customer service and doing customer experience is the notion of considering the emotional viewpoint of your customer base. Over 50% of an experience is about emotion. It drives behavior. Customer experience about using emotions to differentiate. You need to look at emotions, action emotions, to do customer experience correctly. Our interview base of professionals, 88% said emotions key to customer experience, but few actually knew what was actually being done about it. And when they did mention something, it tended to be very qualitative, looking at focus group work, or doing things that were very quite transactional measures, like looking at customer satisfaction surveys, or doing what they do already, net promoter surveys. Don't actively have much in the way of emotional measurement. The final risk is customer experience is a change of your organization, and it does take time to execute. So you do need to embed it for the long term. One of our interviews spoke about taking 6 to 7 years. Another spoke about it takes 5 years to go from awful to okay. Another 5 years to go from good to great. So are you fit for purpose over the long time? Or are you just adding more functionality and not getting your organization ready for the long term? Is the mindset correct? Which brings on to the challenge of customer experience. You need to get the definition right. When we spoke to our CE professional group, 60% basically spoke about it as just straight touch point mapping, looking at touch points, looking at another 28% about customer research. So again, very few were talking about it definitively as about emotion, because essentially, while they accepted emotion is important, they weren't really doing anything about emotion. But experience is built about being memorable, about creating experiences that are emotional, something you want to go back and pay for. It's not just about quite a defensive definition about touch points and touch point measurement.
And I think just building on that, the issue for me becomes that what we're actually talking about here is touch points doing a logical, rational approach. What we know is customers are not necessarily logical and rational, but actually absolutely can be irrational. And therefore defining customer experience as just looking at touch points is absolutely the wrong way of looking at life. Because customer experience touches a number of different areas, not least of which is about the way that the organization is internally concerned.
So the challenge is to get enlightened. If you're one of those first generation sectors that do, even if it's just in thirds of the sector, do customer experience, you really need to think about your definition you're applying, not just badging or rebadging stuff you do already like marketing, customer service, or taking CRM and calling it customer experience management. You really need to look at the definition you're applying. If you're one of those second generation sectors, maybe driven by regulation, patient experience in healthcare, for instance, or looking at one of those drivers in B2B that we saw, going from acquisition to relationship and retention, such as in logistics and manufacturing, you need to make sure that you start off from a good foot. You start off from a good definition of what customer experience is. Otherwise, you're just doing the same old thing you did before with no return. There's certain challenges also in terms of getting the internal mindset right. When we spoke about what were the key challenges, it was often actually internal. Other things, other priorities override. We'll do it, but we're really playing lip service to it. We've got other stuff going on, cost-cutting agendas. Our culture, our mindset of the organization isn't right. We lack an understanding or leadership of customer experience. All internal challenges of customer experience. It's not all about external challenges of what you do. It's internal, getting the mindset right. Also, another challenge is about getting the right people, or getting those people who you select to be engaged and understand customer experience. We took a sample from our database, 136 in this case. We looked from where they came from. They're currently doing and have Director and VP of Customer Experience in their title, but 78% have no background in customer experience. Possibly, customer experience has been going on for 10 years. Maybe that's not too much of a surprise, but the point here is this. If you don't have a background, you need to understand it. If you have a lack of understanding, you will just take on board what you've done before, for instance, operations work or customer service work, and call that customer experience. Another challenge in terms of projects and the implementation was a lot of these fit that example of badging what you've done before. People doing IT and software was the top area of activity in terms of customer experience, training, and customer research. Again, lack of focus on the mindset of the organization and turning it around to be more customer experience focused, a risk of doing basic things in terms of IT and software.
And again, we've talked about this previously at previous webinars, and happy to talk with people afterwards about this, but the key issue for us is which of the projects is driving value? How do you know which project actually drives the most value for you? And that's the key thing to find out. And I think what Stephen's talking about here, and again the danger of the implementation here, is that the phrase customer experience, for the concept of customer experience, like with CRM, gets hijacked by IT. And everyone thinks this is about buying IT solutions when it's not. That may be part of the solution, but it's certainly not the main solution.
Another challenge, and this is a positive one this time, it's a necessity. There's a rise of customer empowerment. You need to do it. Before, if we'd asked this question maybe 5 years ago, the overwhelming one would have been the same, but more so. We need to differentiate because we're under commoditization pressure. Second most important, or second equal, is actually responding to the increasing power of the customer globally. In actual fact, we've identified 10 drivers, the first one being the use of social media, even in countries unexpected, possibly for some, those low to mid-mature, Turkey, Brazil, increasingly looking towards social media. Development of ultra-competitive markets, that's understandable. Fast society, we want it now. Burgeoning middle classes in countries such as India, development of high-value consumer segments in UAE and China, and demand for luxury and branded goods and services. Governments responding with deregulation in the banking sector, for instance, saying now you have to respond to customer complaints, for instance. And quite frankly, international travel, people going overseas and seeing more of what other services provide in, for instance, UK and USA, and expecting more when they come to their own country. In effect, leadership themselves is being internationalized. You do your MBA, for instance, in Harvard or London Business School, you come back to your corporation in Turkey or wherever it is, and you want to bring those best practices to your country. And likewise, you see on Facebook what's going on. You have a window to the world. So, last 5 or so minutes, that's fine in terms of saying the risks, challenges, and opportunity as well, but what do you need to do to ensure that customer experience management isn't potentially thrown in the bin? First of all, you need to become more customer conscious. We've seen growth in CE programs from those industries that are increasingly customer aware. One of our interviewees spoke about customer experience as an organizationally conscious effort, and it is very much that. We've seen in one of our risks the need to plan for the long term. If you're going to become customer conscious, you need to do that for the long term and change your organization to become customer conscious. And this is where we give you a staged example of the type of organizational roadmap you should employ. This is what we see as important. We're looking at the organization, understanding customer experience, getting it. Getting the difference is emotional. Setting the strategy, doing research in emotions, understanding the return, understand where your organization is in terms of customer experience, and then doing something. Embedding customer experience for the long term as a culture and ensuring governance of that customer experience in your organization. It absolutely means a focus on design and redesigning experience and piloting those designs, and part and parcel of that is call center infrastructure, all the things we've spoken about, IT and software, but it's only one part of that, and of course the monitor and review. If you're going to do a customer experience program, you have to see you get a return on that. Just by way of example, we spoke earlier about doing IT and software implementations. We would see that as a process improvement, and we put CRM as part of that process improvement. But if you don't understand CE, if you haven't done that first stage of the journey and aligned it to emotional engagement, you're not doing customer experience. Your processes will fall down because they do not deliver a wow experience, a moment of delight, an emotionally engaging experience to create loyalty. If you're doing process improvements alone and you do not see embedding customer experience as a culture change or engaging the organization with having CE councils and governance, then you'll have no support from leadership and it'll die quickly. You do the process, the culture isn't right, there's no follow-through for the long term. And we've seen again it's a long-term strategy. And you need to monitor review. If you're doing these IT programs without seeing the change in loyalty, then you cannot understand whether you are getting the biggest return for your investment. We see you must have emotions inside your organization. You're getting an increasingly complex world. You need better control. You need more customer action. We see customer experience as changing your mindset, being used for the long term as an organizing principle for your organization. If you remember the maturity index, we stopped at retention. We see another potential. Redesign around customers, deliver for customers. We don't want to see a world where you're basically doing nothing, just more control and more waste. Key difference there, having that emotional engagement and organizing your organization for customer experience. Finally, we would ask of you think about 7 strategic questions now. We've set the challenge. Are you doing customer experience? And think about these questions. Can you answer these? What is the experience you're trying to deliver? What are the emotions you're trying to evoke? What is your subconscious experience? Is your customer experience deliberate? Do you really know what customers want and provides you with the most value? And internally, that organizational principle again, how customer-centric is your organization really? That's the end of the webinar, so I'd like to thank you for your time. If we will open it up for questions, I think Colin would just like to say.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Very interesting results, even though I say so myself. I think what I'd like to do is just, I guess, summarize for me what I see as the key points that are coming out of this. The first main point is that customer experience is global. Okay, so if I look back 10 years ago, customer experience wasn't global, but it is global. But there are big dangers, and there are big dangers for you as individuals if you are running customer experience programs within your organizations, because your bosses have turned around and effectively said that we're going to invest in customer experience, we want you to go away and do this. And effectively, if all you are doing, as what seems to be coming out from this survey, is putting lipstick on a pig, you are not going to get the types of change that your bosses believe that you are going to get. And that's a danger and a risk for you personally, not just for a risk for customer experience as a sort of a concept. I would absolutely suggest that you need to absolutely think about the maturity and where you are, and these slides will be on our website after the presentation. So please please go to that and take a look at that and, as well. In fact, probably give us till tomorrow to make sure that we've got it up there. But where are you in that level of maturity? And going back to what Stephen was just saying is that the customer experience is not about touch point mapping. That's absolutely part of it, but it's absolutely about how customer-centric your organization is, how you are designing a deliberate experience. Over 50% of an experience is about how a customer feels. So you've got to think about all those things, and you've got to educate your organization on that. And again, we've coped with a lot of this stuff in previous webinars on the key strategic questions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up for any questions. So Justin, I know Justin has been monitoring to see if there's any questions that come about. So we've got another 10 minutes before we need to finish. So Justin, do you want to fire any questions over that you may have?
Yeah, for Steven, when he talks about emotions inside, what does that mean exactly?
Okay, well, we saw, again, that people talk about emotions and they say, we do it, we really want it, we understand that and how important it is, but when it comes to actually doing it, it's just talk. Emotions are not inside. You need to think about how you can go about measuring and monitoring the emotional response of customers. Do you have research infrastructure in place to do that? What we mean by research infrastructure is, for instance, beyond philosophy, we'd say, do you actively measure and understand how to measure emotions quantitatively? So you understand, for instance, what the emotional drivers are to your experience and what drives those emotions, but also qualitatively, the things like we spoke about social media. Do you do sentiment analysis? Do you have an active understanding through research in your company about emotions? And then, do people talk about emotions? Do your sales teams talk about emotions? Again, is emotions inside, or do they talk transactionally? Do they have KPIs around, in one way, shape, or form or another, developing emotional experiences? And when you design experiences, do you just talk transactionally, or do you actively think, how can we create an emotional pull for people when we go to, for instance, your touchpoint maps, when we overlay looking at creating moments of delight? Do we actively do that, or do we just look for breakages, for instance, or do we just do transactional things? Thank you.
Another question, how do you make top management become emotional and get them to truly care?
Now if I knew the answer to that one, I'd be a very rich man. Um, it's a question that we get asked a lot, and let me, in fact, I was only with a bank yesterday, and we were talking about this. One of the key ways of doing this is relating experiences, personal experiences they've had, to understand it. So for me, asking a question like, okay, what's the best experience that you've ever had? Why was it good? Listening to then the words that they're using, and invariably they will use feeling words, emotional words. They will say they made me feel special, or you know, that was really good, or yesterday I was talking to a chap and he said, I got excellent service. And when I said, well, what did you mean you got excellent service? Well, the way the person talked to me and the way that he made me feel special. And I guess the key issue is that, no matter how senior you go, believe it or not, these people are human beings. And as such, they will have good experiences, they will have bad experiences. And it's getting them to understand that that's the case, and then turning around and drawing the analogy with your organization. One of the things that we do is a customer mirror, where we basically go out and have customer experiences. One of the things that we did a little while ago, a famous one that we talk about a lot, is a client of ours asked us, an insurance client, asked us to get a car, take out an insurance policy and go through the whole claims process. And we did that, and we actually had to go and crash the car. But the whole experience we then logged down, and we recorded the phone calls that we had, we videoed it, etc., etc. And then playing that back to the senior executives to say, look, this is a typical experience that our customers are having, and how would you feel if this was happening to you? The frustration, the stress that it causes, etc. And what we absolutely know is those things drive down value. So again, if you look at things like our emotional signature, you can actually start to equate how much value, retention, decreasing in net promoter, etc., that you will get by causing negatives, and how much positive emotions that you will get by evoking those positive emotions. So you have to relate it to the individual. Just because they're a senior person does not mean that they don't have emotions. They will have had good and bad experiences, and I would do it that way. Any other questions, Justin?
Yeah, what experiences have you had working in healthcare systems where there's an emerging focus on customer experience?
I think, there's two. In fact, I'll let Steven answer this, because Steven did a lot of work over here with the National Health Service, and also we've done work over in the States with healthcare, both from a pharma, from an insurance, and from a hospital perspective.
Yeah, obviously it's a big picture. Not too sure which country that's coming from, but obviously in the USA with the focus on patient experience. Likewise in the UK as well, focus on patient experience. And increasing concern, well, what is that? What is it like? One of the work we did was using the customer mirror principle Colin was talking about with a cancer hospital, actually see and observe what was happening in action and how patients make decisions. Because oftentimes patient experience traditionally has been make them better and that's it. Lack of concern for what the emotions they're feeling as they go through the experience. And that's a challenge, because even in those sort of empathetic environments, there's an assumption you're delivering a service, you're delivering a cure-all, and that's it. It's not. It's also about the holistic. How can we make that experience better? And actually, one of the things that was found was actually people make judgments in the experience on the modern look of the machinery, because they don't know about whether this doctor is necessarily doing the best thing, a good, bad. They just assume it's going to be a good doctor. That's almost a taken for granted. What they do is they look and take clues from the experience to make judgments about you. Patient experience, understanding those clues, we absolutely pick up through that customer mirror approach. So we would actively look for walking the journey of a patient, understanding what clues and how you can embed emotional or empathy in that journey they have with you.
Okay, Justin, I think we've got time for one more if there's one more question.
Okay, what do you need to consider within customer experience with the exponential growth in social networks?
Wow, I'm not sure if we can answer that one in a few minutes, but you know, I think, in fact, in the sort of the social networks, in fact, this was in our last book. We wrote 2 or 3 chapters on the whole subject. What social media is clearly doing is it's another channel, but it's an instantaneous channel, and it's a channel where everyone can suddenly see what you're doing. So, as people know, you know, people are losing control, and that's one of the big things that organizations have got to get to grips with, that they are losing control of the message, and the message is being put out there by the masses, basically. So from a customer experience perspective, I think it's absolutely wonderful, but it absolutely needs to be embraced. And I guess the key issue for me goes back to the mindset, which is, you know, getting the mindset of the organization right. So the organization absolutely believes in that, you know, conversations over Twitter, Facebook, et al. Is the right thing, and actually it's a healthy thing and not something that should be avoided.
I'd just like to say one thing on that, because this comes back for me for having that emotions inside concept. So with social media, it's almost like customer experience is being continuous. It's live, it's happening now, there are relevant conversations going on now about your business. So you need to understand, you know, what's the sentiment like? Is it positive or negative? Do you have that view of what's happening in social media? But it's also about, you know, you can get great anecdotes and stories from social media that you can share around your organization that makes emotions live. Coming back to this point that it's an organizational imperative, about the internal organization and getting it right, getting the mindset set for customer experience, understanding emotions through the organization. So that is another way that it can be used. It's actually a gold mine for research. You can mine it. We know of industries and sectors, for instance, and companies that have used the social media chatter in their new product development process. What are people talking about? Which part of our service? And what could we design in that? And also putting it out there to get feedback. So I think it comes back to the point about making sure you have a window on that and you use that window to your advantage and understand the emotions and how people feel on this continuous, almost live broadcast of what your experience is on a daily basis.
Okay, so I think I'm going to call this to a halt now because I'm conscious of time. For those people that when you leave you will get a questionnaire which we would ask you to spend a couple of minutes just filling out, if you wouldn't mind. Your feedback for us is really important. If you want to talk further about this research or anything else that we've discussed today, we're more than happy to have conversations to enlighten you as time goes on. You know, one of the things in Beyond Philosophy is we all passionately believe that the customer experience is a key differentiator and a key part of any organization's strategy. But I have to say that from these results there is a danger, and the danger is that organizations start to put lipstick on a pig and start to not really address the core issues and make those changes that they need to make. And certainly I, for one, do not wish to see customer experience go the same way as customer relationship management, CRM, that effectively feels like it's got a bad reputation now of costing a lot of money and not actually producing results. And therefore, some of those early conversations, one of the ways we get used a lot is just to be able to go into an organization and say that your baby's ugly. So sometimes, you know, a tough message coming from the outside gets received better than somebody internally saying that we need to change things. So anyway, thank you very much for your time. We will be putting the webinar on the website with the recording, so people will be able to come into and listen to it again. We are also producing a white paper which we will send out to all those people that have listened into this call. As you click, as we close the webinar, please spend a couple of minutes just filling out some simple questions, and we look forward to hearing you on another call. And thank you very much, Stephen, for all your hard efforts on pulling these results together.
Yes, and thank you. And thank you to the interviewees as well for helping out those 53 professionals as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.